In this video I want to give you a very useful technique to help you write your novel. It's particularly helpful for those times when you get stuck and look ahead at the 70,000 words still waiting to be written and you feel a bit daunted. It's called the Khaldei technique, named after the famous Russian World War II press photographer Yevgeny Khaldei, who took this famous photo of the Russian army in 1945 hoisting the red flag above the Reichstag building in Berlin. One of the most famous and iconic photographs of all time. And to set the mood, we will be taking the bus to Sutton Courtenay, a few miles south of Oxford, to visit the grave of a man intimately connected with the technique I'm about to unveil. So welcome to another instalment in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. Well, it's not straightforward getting to Sutton Courtenay by bus, so I'm going to cycle there. And this is the grave. I can't show you whose it is just yet, because first we need to understand the nature of the problem that the Khaldei technique is designed to address. And by the way, don't bother Googling the Khaldei technique. You won't find it, because I invented it. But I think it's a pretty useful technique though. Now the problem is one that bedevils all new writers, and it's easier to describe than define, and it goes a bit like this. You get up at 6 a.m. or whatever the appointed hour is, and you've allotted 2 hours, and you're determined to write come what may. And you sit down and you write a few paragraphs, and then you stop, and you think, what the heck am I doing? Is this how I'm supposed to write an 80,000 word novel? I've only written 700 words. I never knew it would be so hard. Well, the good news is you're in good company if you feel like that, because all writers do. So what do? Well, you start with a change of mindset. Don't try and write a novel. That is just far too difficult. Instead, set out to write a first draft. One that no one else will see. And don't worry if it is rubbish, it almost certainly will be. But that doesn't matter. Because once you have something in the bag, once you have that first draft, you've got something you can go back and make better, improve. And you do that over and over again in the process of distillation. All writing is rewriting. Think of the first draft as the sand with which you'll build your sandcastle. If you adopt this technique, an interesting thing happens. You might find that after 4 or 5 drafts that your novel starts to take shape quite nicely. But there is a problem. You find that the novel you end up with bears almost no resemblance to the one you set out to write. Why is that a problem? Because of the writing cop. This is the chap who will arrest you for writing your novel the wrong way. Someone tells you your novel is pretty good and you feel like an imposter because you didn't intend it to be the way it turned out. All new writers are afraid of the writing cop. But the good news is there is no writing cop. You can do it any way you please as long as you don't tell anyone. Which brings me back to this famous photograph. Because the truth is, it's not all that it seems. This photograph was staged some days after the fall of Berlin. You see, Stalin had seen in the news this iconic photograph, the American soldiers hoisting the flag over Iwo Jima, and he wanted one for Russia, so he sent Yevgeny Khaldei off to Berlin with orders to stage a similar shot. He took the train to Berlin with the flag in his suitcase, made out of 3 tablecloths joined together, so the story goes. And there's an interesting codicil to this, because before they published the photograph, Khaldei retouched it. He rewrote history, just like you are going to rewrite your novel. Now this was nothing new. Soviet photographers were pretty experienced when it came to rewriting history. Stalin frequently had people who had fallen into his disfavour removed from photographs. This example is Stalin with Nikolai Yevzov, the head of the secret police. Yevzov was condemned to death in 1940 on Stalin's orders, and so the retouchers got to work. But with the Berlin shot they retouched it because they noticed that this chap helping raise the flag had wristwatches on both wrists, and it was well known that most people would interpret that as meaning he looted one of them from a corpse. So they removed one of the wristwatches. Interestingly, a similar retouching of history happened on Iwo Jima. It turns out this famous image was their second flag raising that day. They used a bigger flag and they choreographed it better with a more heroic arrangement of soldiers. The first one took place in the morning, and here it is. Not so good, right? This is your first draft. Now, there are a number of benefits that derive from adopting this attitude. Firstly, it makes life so much easier. It's very hard filling the blank, empty white space. It's so much easier to improve on something that you already have to work with. As they say in Hollywood, just give us something we can change. But the really big one for me is that doing it this way allows you to unleash your inner Khaldei. It allows you to unleash the power of what I call weaponized serendipity. I want to cover that in much greater depth in the next video about Chekhov's time machine. So this brings us to the grave. Whose is it? Well, before I show you, let me ask you something. If I said I would give you the greatest piece of writing advice condensed into a single word, would you be interested? Well, you can get it by downloading Gateway to Narnia, my free 10-part email course on how to write your novel. The link is in the description below. And now the grave. It belongs to a man who wrote a novel that immortalized the notion of rewriting history, a dystopian satire about a man, Winston Smith, who worked in the Ministry of Truth, rewriting old copies of the Times newspaper. The novel, of course, was 1984, and the author, Eric Blair, better known to us as George Orwell. You see, he even rewrote his own name.